All right, everyone. Get ready for a fascinating deep dive today.
Uh-huh.
We're going to be looking at the historical relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism.
Okay.
And we've got some amazing linguistic and archaeological evidence
Right.
to sort through. You know,
Right.
I love a good mystery.
Yeah.
So we're going to try and figure out, using all these fascinating clues, which of these traditions came first
Yeah.
and how they might have influenced each other.
That's right.
Now, I have to admit,
Sure.
when I was prepping for this deep dive,
Uh-huh.
one of the first things that kind of jumped out at me was the word Hindu itself.
Right.
It's everywhere. But you're telling me it's not actually found in any ancient Indian religious texts.
That's correct.
Really?
The term Hindu is actually a Persian word.
Okay.
It was used originally to denote people living near the Indus River
Interesting.
and only appears in Indian texts around the 11th century CE,
11th century.
which is a stark contrast to the term Buddha, which we find in inscriptions dating back over 2,250 years.
So that's a big difference.
Ish difference.
Wow. So right off the bat, we're already challenging some pretty fundamental assumptions.
Yeah.
I know some people claim that Sanatan Dharma,
Right.
which is often used interchangeably with Hinduism,
Uh-huh.
actually predates Buddhism. Does that hold any water?
Well, let's unpack what Sanatana Dharma actually means.
Okay.
Sanatana simply translates to eternal.
Eternal.
It's not a name for any specific religion.
Got it.
It's more like a descriptor.
Okay.
Interestingly, Buddhist texts refer to the Buddha's teachings as Dhammo Sanatano,
Okay.
suggesting that they saw their own path as the eternal one.
So they thought that Buddhism was eternal, not Hinduism.
Exactly.
Huh. That's ironic, isn't it?
It is quite ironic.
It seems like we're finding clues that even the concept of Dharma itself
Yeah,
might not be as ancient as we typically think.
that's right.
Our research shows that the word Dharma doesn't appear in any Indian inscription before the 9th century BCE, which is much later than the earliest appearances of Buddha.
Yeah, this is where the evolution of language comes into play
Okay.
and the development of Sanskrit.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the concepts and terminology associated with what we now call Hinduism
Yeah.
might have solidified later than many believe.
Interesting.
And there's more.
Okay, lay it on me.
Even the term Brahman is absent from ancient inscriptions, even during the Shunga dynasty,
Okay.
which was known for promoting Brahmanical ideas.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that even the word Brahman didn't exist back then?
Well, the term Brahmin, as we understand it today,
Right.
with all its associated social and religious implications,
Yeah.
seems to have emerged later.
Okay.
Think about it. Megasthenes, who was a Greek ambassador to India around 310 BCE,
Okay.
and even Emperor Ashoka in his edicts,
Okay.
both mention Shramanas,
Okay.
which refers to ascetics, but neither mention Brahmins.
So that's pretty significant.
It's a significant absence.
It is.
Yeah.
But what about the Rigveda?
Right.
It talks about Brahmins and the caste system.
Sure.
Isn't that proof of Hinduism's ancient origins?
That's a common argument.
Okay.
But we need to ask ourselves, how old is the Rigveda itself?
Right. Good point.
The archaeological evidence doesn't support the existence of the Rigveda
Okay,
or the
yeah.
concepts it contains
Yeah.
before the 10th century CE.
10th century. Wow.
Even UNESCO's classification of the Rigveda as ancient is
Yeah.
based on a manuscript from 1464 CE,
Right.
which doesn't definitively prove its true age.
Wow. That's a game changer. It seems like everything I thought I knew about the timeline is being flipped on its head.
It is quite a revelation.
Yeah, it is.
Now let's delve into the languages themselves.
Okay.
While Sanskrit is considered the language of Hinduism
Oh.
and Pali the language of Buddhism,
Right.
the evidence actually points to Pali being older.
Really?
Numerous Pali inscriptions, including Ashoka's edicts, predate any Sanskrit inscriptions.
So the languages themselves are kind of telling a story
They are.
about which tradition might have come first.
Exactly.
This is like a historical detective novel, and we're just uncovering the first clues.
That's a great analogy.
And this linguistic puzzle is closely tied to the development of writing systems.
That's right.
Sanskrit,
Yeah.
written in the Devanagari script,
Right.
could only have emerged after the 9th century CE.
Correct.
All right, I'm ready for the next chapter in our investigation.
Okay.
Before we go there, though, I want to touch on art,
Sure.
specifically sculpture.
Okay.
The oldest sculptures in India come from the Indus Valley Civilization,
That's right.
which predates both Hinduism and Buddhism as we know them.
Exactly.
And this is where it gets really intriguing.
It does.
There's some fascinating connections
Yeah.
between Indus Valley civilization art and early Buddhist art.
Uh-huh.
Similar clothing styles, the swastika symbol, tree motifs,
Right.
and even a figure in a meditative pose with animals.
Yeah, all these elements suggest a strong influence.
So there's a visual link between the Indus Valley civilization and early Buddhist art.
It seems so.
That's pretty cool.
It is fascinating.
What about Brahmins? Do they have sculptures?
Interestingly, Brahmins initially didn't engage in idol worship. That practice only became common after the 8th century CE.
Wow, so even the artistic practices themselves point to a different timeline than what's commonly believed.
It appears that way.
It seems like everywhere we look,
Yeah.
we're finding evidence that challenges the traditional narrative.
That's right.
This truly is a deep dive.
It is, and we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, there's so much more to uncover
There is.
as we continue our exploration of Hinduism and Buddhism.
Absolutely. Another common argument you hear for Hinduism being older
Yeah.
is that it doesn't have a single founder,
Oh, right.
unlike Buddhism.
Right. That's what I've always heard.
Yeah.
But does the evidence really support that claim?
Well, the major sects of Hinduism, Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and Shaktism,
Okay.
they didn't actually come about until after the 8th century CE.
8th century.
Buddhism, on the other hand, has been around since the 6th century BCE with the teachings of the Buddha.
So even if Hinduism doesn't have a single founder, its major branches
Right.
seem to have developed later than Buddhism.
That's right. It's a pretty significant distinction.
Yeah, it is.
And there's a fascinating twist to this story.
Okay, tell me.
The Shankaracharya, who founded Advaita Vedanta,
Okay.
which is considered a core school of Hindu thought,
Uh-huh.
was actually initially part of the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
So one of the most important figures in Hindu philosophy
Yes.
had roots in a relatively recent form of Buddhism.
That's right. It's a great example of how digging deeper
Yeah.
and challenging traditional narratives can lead to some really surprising discoveries.
This is completely changing my understanding of how these traditions relate to each other.
And speaking of challenging narratives, let's take a look at the accounts of foreign travelers who visited India throughout history.
What can we learn from their observations?
Well, before the 11th century CE,
Right.
none of these travelers mentioned anything about the Vedas, the Ramayana, or the Mahabharata,
Which are like,
the texts that are considered central to Hinduism.
yeah, exactly.
Instead, they described the prevalence of what were called Shramana traditions,
Brahmana traditions.
which included both Buddhism and Jainism.
Okay.
Jainism is another ancient Indian religion
Uh-huh.
that emphasizes nonviolence and spiritual liberation.
So for centuries, it seems like Buddhism and Jainism were the dominant religious and philosophical forces in India.
At least from the perspective of outsiders.
Right. That's a crucial piece of the puzzle
Yeah,
for our listeners to consider.
it is. And it's only with the arrival of al-Biruni in the 11th century
Okay.
that we start to see evidence of widespread Brahmanical influence.
So that's a pretty significant shift
It is.
in the historical record.
Al-Biruni was a Persian scholar who wrote extensively about India.
Cool.
And his accounts are invaluable for understanding the religious landscape of that time.
But what about the vast libraries of texts associated with both Hinduism and Buddhism?
Right.
Surely those must offer some clues about their relative ages.
You're right. The texts are a critical piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
As we've discussed, Hinduism's texts are written in Sanskrit,
Uh-huh.
which points to a later composition.
Okay.
Many Buddhist texts, on the other hand,
Yeah.
are much older and written in Pali,
Okay.
a language that scholars believe predates Sanskrit.
So the language of the texts themselves
Right.
aligns with the idea that Buddhism could be older.
Exactly.
But what about the content of these texts?
Well,
Do they shed any light on their origins?
here's where we encounter another bombshell.
Okay, I'm ready.
Many stories and characters found in Hindu texts,
Huh?
like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata,
Right.
actually have direct parallels in much older Buddhist Jataka tales.
Hold on. Yeah. Are you saying that some of the most famous Hindu epics
It's possible.
might have actually borrowed from Buddhist narratives?
It seems that Hindu texts may have drawn inspiration from Buddhist stories.
Wow. Okay.
Characters adapting and reinterpreting them over time.
It's a bold claim.
The evidence certainly suggests that possibility.
This is a prime example of how examining the evidence
Right.
with an open mind
Yeah.
can challenge even our most deeply held beliefs.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from language and art to historical figures and religious texts.
It's been quite a journey.
What does it all mean?
Well, it's truly remarkable to see how the evidence, the linguistics, the archaeology, the historical records all point to a different timeline than what's traditionally assumed.
So what's the big takeaway here?
It suggests that the origins of Hinduism, as we know it today, are much later than commonly thought, and that Buddhism predates it.
This deep dive has been incredible. I feel like I've learned more about these two religions today than I ever did in school.
It's amazing what we can uncover.
It is.
When we start questioning assumptions and looking at the evidence with fresh eyes.
So for our listener, how does this new understanding impact their perception of these two major world religions?
Well, it's not about invalidating anyone's beliefs. It's about encouraging a deeper, more nuanced understanding of the historical relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism.
What are the implications of this revised timeline?
We're inviting our listener to engage with these traditions in a more informed and critical way.
Exactly. It's about expanding our knowledge and appreciating the complexity of history.
That's great.
It's about seeing connections and influences where we might not have expected them.
And it's about recognizing that our understanding of the past can always be enriched by new discoveries and fresh perspectives.
It's amazing. It really is.
It is.
To see how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. It's almost like we're rewriting the history books in real time.
In a way, we're not discarding the traditional narratives, but we're enriching them with a deeper, more nuanced understanding.
Exactly. And I think one of the most important takeaways for our listener is that this revised timeline doesn't diminish the significance of either Hinduism or Buddhism.
Absolutely not. Each tradition has its own rich history, profound philosophy, and vibrant cultural expressions. Understanding their historical relationship just adds another layer of appreciation.
It really does. It's like we've uncovered this hidden dialogue between these two traditions.
That is.
A conversation that spans centuries.
For sure.
And, you know, as we were exploring these connections, I couldn't help but wonder about the broader implications. I mean, if our understanding of such fundamental concepts like Hindu Dharma needs to be re-examined, what other assumptions about ancient India might we need to question?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It really is. It highlights the importance of staying curious.
Absolutely.
And open to new evidence. History is an ongoing process.
It is.
Of discovery and interpretation.
We're constantly learning and refining our understanding of the past.
It's like we've only just scratched the surface. There are so many avenues to explore.
There are.
So many mysteries to unravel.
And that's the beauty of it.
It really is.
The more we learn, the more we realize
Right.
how much more there is to know.
So to our listener out there,
Right.
I hope this deep dive
Yeah.
has sparked your curiosity
Absolutely.
and inspired you
Yeah.
to keep questioning,
Keep exploring.
keep exploring.
And keep peeling back the layers of history. Who knows what other fascinating connections and revelations await us?
It's a journey of endless discovery,
It is.
and we're all in it together.
We are.
Well, that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us
You're welcome.
on this incredible deep dive
Yeah.
into the historical relationship
It's been great.
between Hinduism and Buddhism.
It has.
Until next time,
Yes.
keep those minds curious and those hearts open.
Absolutely.